Nantucket Conservation Commission. We are meeting for a special meeting to discuss the Sconset Beach Preservation Fund hearing. On my clock, it is 10:05. The first thing we're going to be doing is confirming the attendance of commissioners. So of the 5 commissioners that we have sitting on this application, when you hear your name, please please respond in the affirmative. Tim Brain,
Here.
Mike Miserelli,
Here.
Joe Plandowski,
Here.
Linda Williams,
Here.
and Seth Engelborg is here. The next thing we need to do is to accept the agenda. Is there a motion to that effect?
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. By roll call vote, Tim Brain, Mike Miserelli,
Aye.
Joe Plandowski,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg, aye. That carries unanimously. We'll move on in our agenda to our public hearing, which is Sconset Beach Preservation Fund at 41 through 119 Baxter Road, SC 48 3736. This application was continued today and has been ongoing for quite some time. We'll begin by asking the Town of Nantucket Natural Resources Department staff if they have any updates or anything they'd like to share with us.
No new updates. I do have the draft as we finished it off last time, ready to share when you guys want to discuss that. But nothing else new.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second. Does any of the representatives from SBPF have anything that they'd like to share at this point?
Yeah, I think so, Mr. Chairman. Chip Nyland, good morning. As you know, we thought that we were going to finish off at the last meeting. We agreed to assent to a continuance on the makeup sand issue at the request of the town, our co-applicant, and hope that we would reach an agreement so that we could come to you collectively. But it's probably the worst kept secret in town that we have not been able to reach an agreement. So I think that today will be our last meeting. I would like to first say that I'd like to thank you as chair and the members of the commission for the way that these meetings have been conducted. Every night we watch throughout the country vitriol and turmoil and people who handle meetings a lot differently. There's a lot at stake here. We recognize that people have differences of opinion, but it's been with marked civility, and I want to appreciate that. We've tried to honor the same, and regardless of where we are on this thing, that our differences, I think that we thank the commission for having had the opportunity for you to allow us to make our presentations and even to have special meetings. So at this point, the way that we look at things, we believe with respect to 3736, the NOI that's in front of you, we think that we've finished, all of the issues that are in the draft order of conditions. We've spent 4 months going over that draft order of conditions. We've addressed the legal question in terms of whether we belong here. You had a peer review. We addressed the question in terms of meeting the performance standards with Beta, a third-party reviewer that came in and offered their opinion that, in their opinion, that the design met the performance standards. We've had a draft order of conditions in front of us that's addressed the major concern that the commission has. 2 major concerns. One is, how do you protect against what happened last time from happening again, which is that the sand nourishment stops? And the second is how to phase the project in. We've agreed with you and the town that Reach 1 should go first or concurrently. I think that was very important. Second, we've reached an agreement on the sand adaptive management plan so that we're not wed to a specific number each year, but what we're doing is replenishing that is lost, which is a significant a victory for all of us, and I think that it's going to be a template for those in the future. And then what we've also done is that we've protected against the concerns about what happens, at the end of this. There's a provision that has a removal feature, an escrow agreement for removal. You have provisions requiring us to have sand contracts so that we guarantee that the sand is available. You even have storage on site. We've spent a lot of time with respect to failure criteria and also in separating out the phases 1 and 2. There's a requirement now that there has to be existing conditions plan before we start. There's more robust monitoring that's taking place quarterly for a number of years, and there are after storm reports as well. And then, there's also an O&M plan, and we have to do that for both phase 1 and phase 2. So when I look at this thing, I've only been doing this for 40 years. It's probably one of the most comprehensive orders of conditions that I've ever seen, and probably more money set aside than anyone that I've been involved with. It's not the most complicated. I think that was probably Greenbush going through, 8 communities to bring back commuter rail, but it's really one that you have taken care of in this order of conditions, what I call cradle to grave, from the beginning of the project right up until the end. And I think that that's, where we are at this stage and point. We think that we have resolved all of those matters, except for the one that was remaining today, which is for the makeup sand. And as I indicated, we haven't been able to reach an agreement. The town, as you may recall, the town supported a 26,000 cubic yard renourishment as a makeup sand. Earlier this summer, we presented that to you, and that was based upon taking the 22 cubic yards per linear foot from the up until the removal order. And then our belief is that we've provided sufficient sand based upon the adaptive sand management plan between then and now. And so we believe that we've put that in front of you. We believe that the town was supportive of that. And second, that the town's position was that that would be a decision for the commission and not for them. But that changed at the last meeting when the town indicated that they would, their representative indicated that he would like to weigh in on that. Our disagreement is in terms of numbers, but also in terms of who makes that call. Our view is that the compliance, once that order of conditions expired, this is an enforcement question. That enforcement question is clearly within the discretion of this commission. It's decided by this commission. If the town wants to, town officials want to kill this project, they have other ways to do it, but that not through this vehicle, because this vehicle is really for the commission to determine what's the appropriate makeup sand. We think that we've provided that to you. So our view is that today we can have a discussion about that, but we don't think there's any need to assent to any further continuances. I think we would like to complete our discussions today so that we can go on. As I said, we've been here for more than a year. We've had a draft order of conditions for more than 4 months, and I think we've discussed everything, and I don't believe there's any more information that the commission needs from us in order for it to go forward and deliberate and issue an order of conditions. So I appreciate your time again.
Thank you, Mr. Nyland. And just as a general point, I've often disagreed with representatives from SPPF, but not once have I ever not respected any of you. I appreciate you being here, and I recognize your legal and regulatory rights to bring this application before us. So thank you for doing so. I see Vince Murphy's hand raised, but before we do that, I'm going to just lay out the general process. I agree with Mr. Nyland in that I think, have exhausted all of the discussion that we need to do at this point. After Mr. Murphy talks, I'm going to ask commissioners if they think they have the requisite information they need to make their decision on the makeup sand that's required in 2824. And we had like a 90-minute discussion on that at the last hearing. I think it was pretty exhaustive. If commissioners think that they have enough information, then we're going to seek a round of public comment. And I'm going to restrict that public comment to information that is not redundant. And then if we are able to do all that successfully, I would like to move towards a closure. But before we do so, Vince Murphy, I'll recognize you.
Thank you kindly, Chair Engelborg. So that was a very wise and useful introduction from Attorney Nyland. We have been through a very elongated, what would you say, 14-month process to get to where we are today. And we have, from my side, from the town side too, to also thank the Commission for all their efforts, their long efforts over such an elongated process. And thank you very kindly to each and every one of you. One of the very first issues that we had going into this was sand. We sorted out everything else along the way. We have not concluded the sand issue. There was a lot of interesting points made by Mr. Nyland just there. We have discussed this amongst the two of us. It has been spirited, but very cordial. Since the start, the town has wanted to rectify the sand issue. It was discussed at Select Board. It was discussed in practically every meeting along the way for the makeup sand. We discussed an issue that SBPF liked last summer for the 27,000 cubic yards. The town never supported it. We just discussed it. I didn't like that misrepresentation. The town has always been interested in ending the issues over SE 48, 28, 24 and rectifying the issues on the beach and getting everything per that order of conditions. That order of conditions that ended in January, that was active right up until then. So we would like to see all of the required nourishment sand placed on the site. That has been the bone of contention. I appreciate that Attorney Nyland wants to move for a closure today. I'd like for the Commission to obviously to discuss that, but I would also like to say that it would be very difficult to see how this project could proceed without the required sand from SE 48, 28, 24, the full volume. From a number of points of view, I don't know how I could go back to the Select Board and say that we don't have that full volume, how that would appear to our governing body, as it were. So that would be my request today, that if the Commission sees fit, that we would proceed under that order to have the correct full volume of sand added to this new draft NOI. The time frame is open for discussion. I don't mind once the Commission also agrees to the time frame. That is something we could continue to discuss. I would hate to see this discussion close under inauspicious circumstances and have to take this back to the Select Board for further discussion to see if I could get more direction from them. That is something I'd like to keep open as an option, to keep the hearing open so that I can continue, that if there's a difficult decision here today, that I could take it to the Select Board before the hearing concludes. Just so that this can be as amicable as possible and put us on the best foot possible for project success. Thank you, Chair Engelborg.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy, and I don't envy your position. We are dealing with a very, very complicated project. Maybe it's not as complicated as Mr. Nyland talking about putting commuter rail through 8 municipalities, but I wasn't involved in that, so I don't know. But it sounds to me like the totality of town government at this point is supporting us to require makeup of the full contribution of sand that was in excess of 105,000 cubic yards that the NRD staff prepared before. The NRD staff provided that number for us as an unbiased entity. It's just their job to make the calculations. The sustainability manager, Mr. Murphy, saying that he strongly needs that to happen. And it sounds like the town administration and select board wants that to happen too. So I can't proceed even without any of those things. I've from the start, personally, said that it doesn't make any sense to proceed with this project to move forward to hopefully a better resolution without rectifying issues in SC 48, 28, 24. So I have everything I need. I personally think we need to use the number that the town and Jeff had determined and let the applicants figure that out. It's not our job to deal with the relationships between the co-applicants or the finances or anything like that. Our job is to rectify past issues that may have caused impacts to wetland resource areas and to issue permits that are going to minimize adverse impacts to the most feasible extent possible. With that being said, other commissioners, do you want to weigh in on the sand question at this point? Either with your thoughts or whether you think you have the information you need to make a thought when we deliberate. Just as a reminder, we are still in open session, but once we close the hearing, we still do have time to deliberate as well. Thank you. Linda, go ahead.
I'm thoroughly confused. That's the only issue as far as I'm concerned. I do agree with that, is the sand mitigation from, I still don't want to be punitive, from before. Spread out over 5 years, spread out over 10 years. If they don't need it because nothing has washed away, I'm not dumping sand on sand just for the hell of dumping sand on sand. I'm still in that position. What number are we at? How many years are we at it? How many a year for the makeup sand from the previous decision? Where am I here? Can somebody just lay it out nuts and bolts? Because otherwise I can't make a decision.
Sure. I don't have the exact numbers up the top of my head, but I'm going to ask Jeff to give them for us. There's two numbers, one that was determined by SPPF's representatives for what they think is sufficient, and another that's determined by the town of Nantucket Natural Resources Department staff for what they think is deficient. Those numbers are drastically different. As for how long it's going to take, where it's going to be placed, none of that is being discussed at this hearing.
Why not?
The condition in the order of conditions doesn't ask for specifics. It asks for a plan to be submitted to the commission for review. The only specific that we're talking about is a specific that requires that plan to have a minimum amount of sand. But never in this hearing, never in the whole process of this year-long hearing, were we going to ask for, before the hearing was closed, for them to tell us exactly when it's being put, where it's being put, who's doing it. We were always asking for a plan to be submitted after the hearing was closed that would have all of that information. So we
But
still,
if we don't
this
discuss,
process
but if we don't
isn't
discuss
over.
it now, as to where we're headed with that, it makes no sense to me to do it after we close it in case we're still miles apart.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, could you walk us through the two different numbers, please?
Sure, so I'll try my best. I'll walk through the one that we put in the draft order of conditions. So to walk through, essentially what we did is we went from the last annual report that was reviewed by Greg Berman. And there was a deficit that was in that report. Off the top of my head, it was right around 47,000 cubic yards and some change in there. That's not perfect. To that report, we then added on for each additional sand year that the structure was in place and the permit that was valid. So the permit was valid through the early part of this year, January of this year. We added on the yearly requirement that would have been in place should that structure have been maintained in compliance with the orders. So that's an additional, and round numbers, 20 to 22,000 cubic yards per year. Added all of those numbers together and got to, before we added those together, in the interim from the report to now, SBPF placed sand on the template. So we subtracted out all of those numbers from delivery reports, and the number that we got to the end was the 105,465 cubic yards of material that would have been required by SE 48/28/24. So that's the number that is just the cold mathematical calculation of that permit. The number that SBPF provided, and I'll apologize for getting the end part probably wrong. They proposed in one of their makeup plans a number a little over 26,000 cubic yards of material to be provided. And I think when we drafted this condition, I think we understood that there's, obviously a differing of opinion, but I think the purpose of not specifying the length of time that it was going to get put out or the locations or dealing with that is also partially related to it's sand that's owed. There's going to be a time frame where it can get deposited, but there's also a length of time in which construction is going to be going on through the reaches. Those conditions are going to change. And I think any makeup sand that gets put down and how it gets put down is obviously going to need to be adaptable to the changing conditions that are there. So I think that was the intent, and not to specify that this amount has to go on in this exact location, but was to maintain a interactive process between the applicants and the commission. But I think at a staff level, we felt it important to at least specify the minimum so everyone could have that expectation set of what the minimum amount needed to be in compliance was to make the previous conditions whole. Hopefully I didn't make that more confusing.
Thank you, Jeff. And I agree that it makes sense to have flexibility in having a plan submitted after. This is also a routine process that the Concom does in plenty of applications. Maybe commissioners want other minimums, like, there should be the sand should be spread out over at least this many years, or no more than this many years, or whatever. We can talk about that. But to try to ask for a completely engineered plan right now, that's definitely gonna delay this hearing. We certainly wouldn't be closing the hearing tonight if we were asking, or today if we're asking for that. Other commissioners, questions, comments? Do you think you have the requisite information on the sand to proceed? Yes, Tim, go ahead.
I'm kind of in agreement with Linda that the time period over which the sand is deposited, I would think that would make a difference to SBPF. I know that there's a big expense. It's a big number between 25 and 105. Wouldn't it make a difference if the time period were longer to SPPF? Is that a sensible question?
It's a sensible question. If anyone from SPPF wishes to answer that, you're welcome to. You're not required to, but it's open to you if you like.
Hi,
Meredith?
good morning. Oh,
Go ahead.
hi, good morning. Meredith Moldenhauer. I'm have SPPF. Yes, Commissioner Brain. I mean, obviously the time period is an impact, but at the end of the day, I think, to Commissioner Williams's comment is also a question of kind of what's the right number. When we started off on this, we entered into the MOU with the town, and we acknowledged that we would, find an appropriate number, an appropriate amount for compliance. We believe that it's the commission, it's your ability to determine that number, given that this is an enforcement issue. And when we apply the current sand, adaptive sand requirements, if we had applied that to the original project, which is part of the reason why we were in the removal requirement, was because we didn't have the right calculation for the original project, we would be at 0. We obviously knew that 0 was not the right number for a compliance plan. So we went back and we looked at the calculations and we evaluated it based on the removal order. And the fact that, at that time we were under an enforcement condition, and we believe that it was then that the commission could make a decision to modify the required number. And so I heard from the town that, they want to see what the required nourishment is. It's our position that it's your job, your authority to determine what is required. Obviously, there's a difference between 26,000 and 105,000. We put it into your hands to come up with a number that we believe would be hopefully based on science and based on an enforcement, something that is maybe a compromise. And obviously, time would also be a helpful factor there. Thank you.
Thank
May I
you.
speak on that?
Who was that?
Vince Murphy.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, we have an MOU from March of 2022 where it spells out that SBPF must undertake the required nourishment. That does not specify a volume. It mentions, I believe, the 2824, SE 482824, that is a legally binding document that describes how much sand is required. I'm a scientist. I find this difficult to say. The math that SBPF provide up until 2021 is based on the erosion rate of the bluff. That is the science of it. When this was determined 12 years ago, thereabouts, and when SBPF agreed to the nourishment volume, and when it was amended for the extra length, they continued that nourishment volume for the extra length. This project was legally binding. The science is what we'd love to see. The legal requirement is where we are. And that is something that we must understand. And it was the legal requirement that caused the issue that led to the enforcement order that was upheld. Rectifying the enforcement order is what we're here to do. And to correctly nourish the beach per the original order conditions and the amended order conditions is what is required. It's legally binding. I do love the science of it. I am a scientist, but when a buffer is put on that is legally required, that is the situation we find ourselves in. And for those that practice the law, you can have an issue with it, but once you've agreed to it, it's difficult to have issue. Thank you.
Still looking for a number. That's
Yeah,
all.
hold on. Linda, it's not your turn. So I think there's a few things that we should stray away from. One, is that saying scientifically the number that is in SC 28 or SC 48, 28, 24 is definitively wrong. That has not been proven by anybody. I know that Dr. Dunk and representatives from SPPF have presented their beliefs on that, and it has data associated with it. And I know that other third parties have also collected data and shown scientific research that shows that that number actually may be the required number. But that's not even the point here. The point here is that it is not up for us to determine what Ms. Moldenhauer says is an appropriate number of sand mitigation. It's our job, whether you like it or not, to determine what is the required number. When there's a permit in place with conditions, they must be followed or amended. If we're not following them, we might as well just take this entire permit that we're writing for 3736, delete all the conditions, and have it say nothing. Because that is our job. Our job is to attempt to permit projects and condition projects in a way that those conditions minimize the adverse impacts to any resource areas. And we might not personally like the conditions, might not personally agree with the conditions, but we took an oath, all of us, to be regulators of this resource area and of our two bylaws and two sets of regulations, state and local, that we protect, to do that very thing. And if all of a sudden we're just saying we have the discretion to change conditions whenever we want, that sounds like the most arbitrary thing I can imagine. You want to get appealed, put in some number, other than what's in the permit, and I can assure you it will get appealed. And we might not like that number, but I can't possibly foresee any way proceeding to an amicable resolution without that number. So thank you. Other commissioners other than Linda before we proceed to Linda. Tim
Mike?
spoke already. Mike or Joe, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say that it certainly would have been easier if the town and SBPF had come to agreement, but that's not the case, and nobody said it was going to be easy. One question I have is we had a letter from Doug Rose that was well, it came around to commissioners. I don't know if it was posted in the packet, but I think no matter, well, let me just say, I think spreading the sand volume over time is reasonable and smart because it gives everybody some tools. It gives the commission tools, it gives SBPF tools, and that's important because we can't predict the future. We don't know where the sand volume is going to end up or if we would even need it all, but that's a slightly different discussion. And I think there's a good likelihood that this project still has some hurdles in front of it with town meeting and appeals, and DEP will ultimately have something to say as well. My last, I guess is a question, if appropriate, and if George Pucci is on the line. There was a letter from Doug Rose talking about the commission's legal, just give me a second, legal obligation to follow along. And I'm just curious if he has an opinion, the commission versus what DEP might have to say, or based on appeals about whose final authority it is on the sand. Just more for my peace of mind and maybe a few other commissioners as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Attorney Pucci, good morning. I don't know if you've reviewed the letter or not, or if you have a general thoughts on Mr. Miserelli's question.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. This is George Pucci from KP Law. I apologize. I have not seen that letter or analyzed the issues in it in detail. So I apologize for giving a non-answer to your question. One answer I would give that I think is crucial, no matter what the issue is, it's entirely within the commission's jurisdiction to order the full amount of the sand deficit that led to the enforcement order. And, so I just want to be clear about that. I'm not going to comment one way or another about policy or anything like that, but the applicant is subject to your discretionary authority here, and you've granted the co-applicants, quite a bit of forbearance in light of the fact that there was a Superior Court lawsuit that affirmed a removal order for this structure. So I'm not going to get into the legal nuances about what's at issue before you. I just want to make it clear to the commission, it's entirely your decision how you rule on this issue, both as to what amount of sand you think is required due to the deficit, and also if you want to have conditions on that so that, as Linda is saying, you don't unnecessarily dump a whole bunch of sand on something. You can time it out, you can have staging type requirements, whatever that may be, but it's entirely within your authority to order the full amount of that deficit as a result of, basically as resolution of the existing enforcement order, which is to remove the structure in its entirety. So I just want to be clear about that. The statement that you had just made, Mr. Chair, I couldn't agree with more, the way you basically summed up the issues that are before you today. So I apologize if that's not an exact answer to the question that member was looking for, but I just want to be clear about your authority here.
Thank you, Mr. Pucci. And just a few general thoughts based on what he said. So, as a reminder, an existing enforcement order is still open and valid for SC 48, 28, 24. It asks, it not asks, it has the confirmed legal authority by the Superior Court to have that structure removed. But enforcement orders can be amended at any time. So even if the order of conditions for SC 48, 28, 24 expired in January, that enforcement order remains active. Enforcement orders are active on projects even if they don't have an OOC. We could at any time, instead of going through this notice of intent process, simply require the permit holder of that 2824 to put the 105,000 cubic yards by amending that enforcement order. We entered into a process of this notice of intent, of hearing this notice of intent, and the town, through its representatives, also allowed this notice of intent to be put forward so that we didn't have to do that, so that we could get to a different resolution where ultimately an expanded structure could be permitted. But we didn't do that at the sake of ignoring the issues that came in the past or ignoring any of the lack of mitigation sand or compliance with the permit. The whole hope for this NOI was that it would do two things. The first is rectify the issues in 2824, and the second is lead to a resolution that better served the community in totality. But if we can't do the first, there's no sense of doing the second. So I feel very strongly about this, and I think I've voiced that many times at this hearing and at other hearings. Just in reference to Mike's comment too, there are other additional requirements that this project will need in order to get ultimately built, but they're out of our control. If the town doesn't want this project to proceed, it has way more bullets in its revolver chamber, let's say, to kill this project than we do. It could, ask for a negative recommendation for the article at town meeting. And even if that article passes at town meeting, the town of Nantucket could simply just not issue a license for SPPF to use their land. They have way more discretion than we do. But we're hoping to avoid all that. We're hoping to get to a end result where there is a project. But we need to deal with the mitigation requirements under 2824 and rectify that issue before moving forwards. And if we don't listening to Vince Murphy today, I don't know what the town or select board ultimately will do. But if we don't do it here, I'm thinking they're going to do it at one of their steps anyways. So let's do the right thing for the resource areas and the performance standards and the protected interests that we serve. And then everyone else is going to have to figure out the rest. And just as a general reminder too, any order of conditions, as long as it's active, can always be amended. If for some reason we ask for this 105,000 cubic yards with a plan and it ends up not being necessary or ends up not being feasible or ends up not being the right thing to do, the amendment process remains open for SPPF, the town, or both of them jointly to seek to change that condition. So this is a standard process. Thank you. Joe, do you have any comments before I go back to Linda?
I do. And what it has to do is when we closed the last meeting on this subject, I thought the parties supporting 25,000 and the parties supporting 105,000 were going to look at the assumptions to see if there was something missing or misinterpreted. Apparently not. It looks like it's going to be 105.
Yes. I'm assuming from Mr. Murphy, Vince Murphy's testimony, but it sounds like he said that the town and SPPF had some lengthy discussions on the topic, but couldn't get to a resolution on that. Okay, Linda, go ahead.
This got out of control. I don't disagree with anything that you or George said, or Mike. All I wanted to know was have a better idea of the numbers and the length of time. That's all I wanted. And I'm, how we deal with the previous one is how we deal with the previous one. All I was looking for was some number in my head that I'm dealing with, whether it's 105 or 80 or 26 isn't going to work. And how many years it's stretched out over, and whether or not in the conditions we put in, if it's not needed because it didn't wash away, so there's no reason to dump whatever number that is, because it doesn't need to be dumped. And I had this discussion with Jeff the other day, then we don't have to dump it. What I want to make sure is that they're not forced to dump something that particular stretch of time if it's not needed down there. That's all I'm looking for, and that's what I'm stuck on. How it works out in the thing, or how it mechanically works in a decision or a plan that comes in later, that's fine. But that's where I'm stuck. I don't have a problem closing it today so long as those issues are resolved.
Thank you, Linda. I think the only number I would support is the 105,000 number. In terms of the length of time, I think a 5 to 10 year timeline is reasonably sufficient. If we ask for it all to be done in 1 year, that's excessive and pointless and not really helpful to anybody. When SPPF, this was way back, but when SPPF did submit a mitigation plan for the sand under 2824 that was not deposited. I think they were looking at a 4-year makeup plan. Obviously, it's more sand now, so I think something in the range of 5 to 7 years, not to exceed 10 years, would be reasonably sufficient for all parties.
Could I suggest something?
Personal opinion.
Could I suggest something?
Yes, Vince Murphy, go ahead.
The plan that was not reviewed by the commission that you're talking about was for 47,000 cubic yards over 4 years, and it was 11, just shy of 12,000 cubic yards per year. The current volume of 105 over 10 years, that'll be just a shade over 10,000 cubic yards added to the system per year. That would be one way to approach this, and relatively in line with a previous plan, though it was not reviewed by the commission. And I would think that would be a reasonable way to proceed.
Thank you, Vince. So I think, commissioners, we could probably amend the condition pretty easily to have that 105,000 number in there with a plan. We're asking for a plan that is at a minimum 5-year length and then a maximum of 10-year length, and still asking that specific plan with locations and tactics and contractors and everything to be submitted to the commission. Are commissioners okay with that?
Yes.
Thank
I
you.
have I have a question for you then.
Okay, but Tim, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Mike,
Yes.
Linda, what's your question?
Mechanically, at that point, let's say it's 10 years, it's 10 a year, something along those lines, just to throw numbers. If they don't need to put the 10 on because it's just not needed, I can imagine it's not needed, but if it's not needed, are they in violation if they don't put it on because it's not needed? Because then I'm back to my thing, throwing sand over there. That's just to throw sand over there. Is that something that can be modified if necessary?
Yes, I think that could all be handled in the plan. I think it could be, Mr. Murphy is using basic math right now, saying it's about 10,000 per year, but I think it could be reasonably flexible enough where if it's let's say, a strong winter season and they want to put 20 or 30,000, great. And if it's a mild winter and they want to put 0 in 1 year, I think that's fine. We can capture all of that in the plan that we review.
Okay, that's what I'm just asking for, that kind of flexibility. So it's not like oh my God, I got to put 10 on there and I don't need it.
Yeah. Jeff, would you want to weigh in on that?
Sure. I mean, I think if I may, I think that really is reflective too of what's been proposed with adaptive sand management, where you're gonna have to do monitoring and observation, right? I think, I hate to say it this way, but I think the easy part of this project for the commission ends when an order of conditions get issued, and then it's gonna be the constant vigilance and making sure monitoring requirements are kept. But I think a plan that's put together, if I were the applicant, I would, or as staff would certainly recommend having a means to review it with the commission and say, hey, we're already in excess of what we need there. Can we please pause that requirement for 6 months until the next monitoring report comes in? We'll provide another update if we need to put that down, right? I think having that deliberative process is important, but I think also it's super important to understand what the minimum expectation is over that whole period of time.
Okay. Mr. Nyland, go ahead.
Thank you. So first of all, as Jeff reminded you early on in the process, 2824 has nothing to do with 3736. The question in front of you with respect to this notice of intent is whether or not the project as we have proposed meets the performance standards under the act and under the law. The issue with 2824 has to do with a former order of conditions. And you don't need to resolve 2824 to protect the property under 3736. We had from the beginning asked that these two items be separated, but at the request of the town, we agreed that we would include the resolution of 2824 in 3736. So with respect to 2824, I think that people have a short memory here, and I wasn't around at the time, but it was very clear to me that what happened was the amount of 22 cubic yards per linear foot was too much sand. Not that it was too costly, it was too much sand. And as a result, we stopped applying the sand, which resulted in a removal order. There was an enforcement order that was enforced by the court. The court never said that 22 cubic yards per linear foot is the right number. The court said you were required to apply the sand and you didn't. So they never passed judgment over what that number was. They just said you're out of compliance, which was the correct decision. And I also agree with Attorney Pucci that once there is an enforcement order, the discretion lies with this commission. This commission has a total discretion to do 25,000, 50,000, or 105,000. But what we're reminding you is the reason that we are here is because we stopped applying sand because it was too much. And as just as you have constituents, our representatives, our clients have said, we're not going to do 105,000 because there's no basis for that 105,000 other than a past order of conditions. It's not based on science or on data. It's punitive if you ask for 105,000. If that's in number 55 as 100, that we have to provide at least 105,000 cubic yards. I don't think that this project ever goes forward. We can't guarantee that any other commission is going to amend that at any time. That's going to be out there. So that's why we've proposed to you a number of 26 or 27,000 cubic yards over 5 years, because combined with that and the sand that's been added to the template over time, there is sufficient sand for the littoral process. And Mr. Chairman, you've said the end result is a project that meets the performance standards. That's what we're looking to do. That order of conditions 2824, there's no legal obligation that we have to do 106,000. That's within your discretion to determine. And we've said to you that that is not the right number. It's punitive and should be based upon adaptive sand management. The reason that we were able to reach an agreement with the town was because of adaptive sand management, because the town recognized at the time that the 22 cubic yards per linear foot wasn't the right number. It should be based upon adaptive sand management. And that we should also be coming into compliance with 2824. It didn't say in that document that it had to be exactly what that number was in 2824. And you're right, Mr. Chairman, that's an issue between us and the select board and not you. we're asking that you not include the 105,000, which is punitive, and that there's the number that we've asked for is 25,000. We can't rely on anybody in the future for amending that number. We should be basing, as Linda talked about actual sand that's going to be used there. So, our position is that you are within your discretion to pick that number, and it shouldn't be 105,000 because that's punitive.
Thank you, Mr. Noun, and you've made that point many times. I think we fundamentally disagree on that, at least personally. I think it's restorative, not punitive, but Jeff, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, and I don't want to get argumentative here, but I appreciate that the commission has discretion in this case, but I also think representing that 28-24 isn't involved with this is clearly disputed by the findings we've already discussed, where we're talking about this replacing the removal order, right? So we have to deal with that situation one way or another. And Chair, you mentioned it earlier. This order can replace that enforcement order and set a path to move forward, or this order can ignore that removal order and that enforcement order, and restorative work can happen underneath that, which is a totally separate process. I think combining it into one makes it a lot easier for everyone to understand and deal with. But the terms of that violation still exist, right? There was a permit open for 10 years that had a requirement that could have been amended at any time. And if people felt that the science was incorrect or poor, there are mechanisms to deal with that, just like any other project, right? Whether it's a nourishment project, a vegetation restoration project, house construction, whatever it is, there's a mechanism to deal with that. To try to change what the conditions were of that permit now, I think violates the process that permit was issued with and monitored, and things that happened. I mean, there hasn't been monitoring done for the better part of, since the removal order as well. There hasn't been nourishment that's done underneath that. I think at a staff level, I don't think there's any other number that the commission can really deal with other than the 105, because that's what the previous permit required. And if you don't follow the conditions of the previous permit, why are we issuing a permit? And I'm sorry that people disagree and think that it's punitive. It's not punitive, it's a requirement. Just like any other project, right? If you need to report the amount of herbicide that you had to use to treat Phragmites and you choose not to do it, doesn't mean that later you can say, well, we just don't feel we need to, right? Like, there's been opportunities to amend and deal with this for a decade. I mean, I just, to say it's there, and I just to go through history, and I apologize for going on this like editorial rant here. SC 48 2824, to put this into context time-wise for folks, we've been hearing this application for almost 15 months. SC 48 2824 was heard for 2 meetings. It was filed in the middle of August, and it was issued out at the end of September, which tells you that everything that led up to that moment and those meetings was clearly reviewed. We had third-party reviewers. All of this was put forward and was all put forward by the applicant. And it was what they represented that needed to go in, and it was never changed. So I just wholeheartedly disagree with this belief that this is punitive when it was the permit that was issued, not appealed and not amended. I'll
Thank
stop.
you, Jeff. I think our chair, our staff, and our legal counsel all agree in that regard. And I'll just say too, as a matter of fact, to say the two permits are completely separated from each other ignores the fact that the structure that was built under 2824 is being asked to be retained under 3736. That's like building, that's like taking, I'm going to do this again because sometime in an SPPF hearing, there needs to be a hamburger reference. It's like taking a bun, a patty, a piece of cheese, putting them on a plate and saying, "This isn't the cheeseburger. They're all separate pieces, and you're supposed to take them apart and eat them separately." No one's gonna do that. It's a cheeseburger. So we have to be realistic here. Thank you. Meredith, go ahead.
I enjoyed your cheeseburger reference, but thank you. But I guess I find it a little confusing um that we're hearing from the Natural Resources Department, we're hearing from you as the chair that here's the number, but you can amend it later. But why would we want it? If you can amend it later, then you can have the discretion to determine what the right number is today. And that's all that we're asking. We're asking that you look at the past history and that we don't put blinders on and just say 106 is required when we all know it's unnecessary, it's too much sand. And we come up with a number that is based on science, is based on what we actually know that comes off the bluff, based on an annual basis. And it may not be 26. We hear that. Okay. We completely hear that it may not be 26, but we think that we ask you to vote on a number, and we'll have to work with the select board. They are our partner. We have not heard the select board on this issue. We'll obviously have to go back and work with them. As the chair indicated, there's a lot of other processes and procedures that are going to be required. We know that, we acknowledge it. We have been in this for a long time and are dedicated to finding a solution. We just are asking you to not come up and take a number that you're saying we might even have to come back and amend. Let's come up with a reasonable number based on science, not reason, but science, that we would be happy to defend. We think that if you come up with a number that's somewhere that is not the 106, we think that we would be happy to defend that and move forward. And I will end my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. Vince Murphy, I'll recognize you.
Thank you, Chair Engelborg. I appreciate Meredith's comments. I appreciate the passion. And the statement that we have not heard from the select board is a bit of an issue. The select board entered into a memorandum of understanding in March of 2022 with SPPF, where one of the signed and agreed conditions, another legally binding document of sorts, was where the SPPF will move to get the resolution of the missing sand. When we went for the first NOI that was withdrawn after one hearing, there was a plan in place for the 47,000 cubic, which was the right volume at the time, and SPPF didn't disagree at the time. Now, they did withdraw that NOI. The town then entered into a different agreement where we became partners and where we discussed what we must do in order for this second NOI that we've been hearing for 14, 15 months to move forward. My directive from the select board was to have the missing sand placed in the system. After the last meeting, I did what I said I would do, and I approached various people in town administration, select board members, etc., not the entirety of the select board, just members, to get their opinion and take on it. The resounding, practically unanimous answer was that we must look at the rule of law. We must go for and achieve the full volume of missing sand under the previous permit. Part of the discussion, and this is not necessarily something for the select board, or for the Conservation Commission, but we were looking at it in terms of if they're going to not provide the full volume for the previous project, how do we know they'll provide the full volume for the next project? We want to hold into account. That was one of the things that the select board told me to do, and that is what I'm here doing today. We have had many discussions, wide-ranging discussions on a huge number of different topics. This has been the very first issue. It got left to be the very last issue for the commission to decide on. I'm also going to mention something that the commission should also consider. If any permit holder on any project decides they don't like a condition, what's to stop them saying SBPF got away with it? And then appeal. It would end up where none of this system in front of the Conservation Commission makes any sense. The town would like to see this resolved. We want to work with our partners, maintain the partnership, and get this built. That is the objective here. Protect the houses, protect the road. But we need to close out and finish the issue of the full nourishment of SE 2824 correctly for the full volume of sand nourishment. That's the thought I will leave you with. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Commissioners, at this time, do you have all the requisite information you think you would need to make your decision on this, the makeup sand requirement? Or does anyone have any remaining questions or comments? Yes, Tim, go ahead.
I have a question for Vince. Really a clarification. When in your opening comments, you said you wanted to keep the hearing open, but at the same time, you're saying you're supporting the town's position that the sand should be 105. What's the purpose of keeping the hearing open? I'm a little unclear about that.
It will be difficult for the select board to proceed with taking the warrant article item 81 to town meeting and undertaking the license drafting without a full and clear understanding of where the this missing sand volume starts. I've been sent to try and achieve the maximum sand volume. If we don't get it, it will be hard for the select board to continue with some of this. It would raise some, this isn't for the commission, obviously, but it would raise some extremely serious questions before town meeting and on the floor of town meeting and in the drafting of the wording of the license. The town, so select board, from my understanding, wants the full volume. And that is what I have heard from pretty much everyone I've spoken to on this. So if we don't get the full volume, if the commission chooses to go for a lower volume, I think I might be required to take it to select board, and I'd like to keep the hearing open at that point, so that I can go back, get the opinion of the select board on that point. But if we get the full volume, I don't see any issue in closing today. I would like that, in fact. It's been a long time.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. And Tim, does that clarify it for you?
Sort of. It's so complicated. It's I can't really say I'm 100% clear, but
he wants the 105 and change number to be in the order of conditions when we close, and if it's not in that, he doesn't want to close. Just as a general reminder, the commission has discretion in closing or continuing applications, although we have to have all the requisite information to close applications, but I believe we're far beyond that stage for this permit. But we can continue with at the request of the applicant, either of the applicants, or without the consent of the applicant for two reasons. One is if we're seeking additional information. So I would love to close this hearing. And I think the issues of the sand mitigation under 2824 are an internal Conservation Commission commissioners issue at this point. But that's my personal opinion. Joe, go ahead.
Mercifully, can we please close this thing today?
We'll need to seek one round of public comment for the record, but I hope so. Mike, do you think you have all the information you need to make up your mind on the sand requirement for the mitigation?
Yeah, I'd be ready to close the hearing today.
Okay, and Linda, I know you had some questions. Were your questions satisfied?
Not really, but I'll agree to close. I just want to close.
Okay. All right. Commissioners, Do you have any other questions or comments for town staff or representatives of the SPPF not related to sand mitigation under 2824 that you need to ask before we seek public comment? This would be related to any of the other permit conditions, or I think we're pretty good, but now's your chance. Okay. So we are going to seek public comment on this application. I'm going to allow the public comment to be on any topic related to the application for SC 48, 37, 36. However, I'm going to ask that you don't be repetitive. This record is voluminous. Jeff mentioned the hearing's been going on for 15 months. I think we're probably at over 20 or 30 hours of video playback at this point, and I'm assuming the written record is in the thousands of pages. So if you make a comment that is repetitive to something that we've already clearly discussed and made a decision over, in my authority and discretion as chair, I'm going to politely ask you to conclude your comment. That being said, at this point, if any members of the public wish to make a comment, if you're physically present in the room, raise your hand and Jeff or Mike will let me know. If you're on Zoom, raise your hand virtually and we'll recognize you at that point.
We had two in the room, Emily Molden and Burton Balkhead both raised their hand here, so I think there's two online as well, so you can take in whatever order you wish.
Yes, let's do in-room comments first. I'll recognize Emily Molden. Please introduce yourself for the record with any connection you have to the project and make your comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Emily Molden speaking for the Nantucket Land and Water Council. First, I want to thank the commission for all of the time and energy that you've all put into this hearing process. As you're aware, the Land and Water Council has put a lot of comments on the record, along with many concerns, also with the support of our consultant, Trey Ruthven. We do remain very concerned about several aspects of the proposed project and the new order of conditions as it's drafted, but at this point agree that the primary remaining issue is the sand deficit, and I just wanted to make a couple of final remarks about that. We're certainly pleased to hear that the town is supportive of requiring the full amount of sand to be a condition of this new permit. And I just wanted to express from our perspective the extreme importance of tying that sand contribution to the active life of this new permit. I think logically and from a regulatory perspective, the commission really should require that the existing project come into compliance before issuing a new permit for this new construction, specifically relative to the damage that has already been done to the resource areas by not providing the required mitigation. At a minimum, I think that the sand deficit really should be provided within the 3-year life of this permit. And that obviously comes with optional 2-year extensions. I understand that the applicant has financial considerations, but as the commission's discussed before, that's not necessarily the commission's issue. The commission really just needs to ensure that it is provided. From a practical standpoint, there's no reason that it could not be provided in 3 years or 5 years if the permit is extended. We would really recommend and request that if this new order of conditions is to take the place of the enforcement order and ultimately the removal order, that the commission also add a failure criteria specific to the volume of sand that's to be provided annually to make up for this deficit, completely independent of any new mitigation requirement for the new geotube extension. And I think that that's one way that the town can help to monitor it as far as making up from the prior deficit and lack of compliance from what's now being required. And maybe the town would even be supportive of that as far as just trying to ensure that as things progress they don't fall behind again, and that there is continued compliance for making up that sand deficit. So I would request that the commission just discuss that and maybe would ask through you, Mr. Chair, if Mr. Murphy has any thoughts on adding a failure criteria specific to that sand deficit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily. Before we allow that question, I just have two general points that I was gonna raise. I was gonna keep to the deliberation phase, but the previous speaker raised them. The first is the length of the OOC that we issue. So conservation commissions around the state, including Nantucket, routinely issue permits for 3 years. However, we have the regulatory ability to issue a permit up to 5 years. I don't think we've ever done it, but I would highly recommend for this project that we use that authority. And knowing that it's probably going to be continued anyways, but it's better if we do have long scale projects in place, like a 5 to 10 year makeup sand mitigation plan, we might as well have the permit be active for as long as possible. And then in the certificate of compliance phase, there's always the ability to extend conditions for a set number of time or in perpetuity. So if the sand mitigation still wasn't completed, we could require that at that phase. Vince Murphy, would you wish to weigh in on Emily's question regarding an additional failure criteria? You're not required to, but you're welcome to if you want.
Yes, I will briefly. Haven't gotten to see it. We have other failure criteria within the draft NOI. So long as it's in line with those, I don't see that much of an issue. Again, I would still like to review it before giving a full comment, just a high level comment that I don't see a major issue with it at this time. And I also don't want that to be a reason to delay the closure of the hearing.
Thank you. And any of these things, I don't think will delay the closure of the hearing. Because as a reminder, we don't have to issue this permit today. We have 21 days to issue a permit. I would say even if we did close this hearing today, we can move towards deliberation and talk about some of the conditions and making sure that they're tightened down. And then I would say we're going to have to go through this quite lengthy permit for a bunch of things. Typographical errors, grammar, spelling, numbering, making sure everything's in there. So I would recommend that once that we do that, and then we have another meeting or we tack it on to one of our regular meetings to then actually do a final review and deliberation of that permit before we issued it. It would be bad practice to issue it today, even if we closed. Okay, Burton Balkind, I'll recognize you. Please state your name for the record, any connection you have to the project, and make your comment.
Thank you, Chair Engelberg. Burton Balkind, President of the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. This is the last chance we're going to have it to talk in a public comment period. So thank you for this opportunity. I want to first start off by applauding the commission on your decision last week on Plover Lane. I felt like you guys followed the law. You guys
let's keep it on to this permit application, please.
Okay, well, I just want to applaud you on that and then remind you that the decision-making process you took during that to use it for this approval of the NOI. We at the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy would hope you wouldn't approve it, but understanding if you do, we asked that the order of conditions that were laid out and the town council and the Nantucket Natural Resource Department concluded that the sand volume of 105 cubic yards should be in that order of conditions. And with the talk of adaptive management and putting that in sand in place, we asked that in part of the conditions that you guys go very robust in your monitoring. I would like to see it at least not maybe the kind of transects you had close to the project, but I'd like to see a few transits all the way up to Great Point, because we know the sand system does not only stop where the monitoring is stopped, and same way the other way, like we could go all the way past Tom Never Field. We don't need a transit every X amount of feet, but just maybe one in the very far reaches of what we understand is the sand budget for the island and where the sand goes when it leaves the bluff area. And I guess I would also ask that you guys, this is probably the last time you're gonna hear a comment from the public, just keep the public in mind. This is a public beach. And it's all of our beaches. And so please
Thank God.
be reminded of that. And with that, I'll thank you for the time and that's
Thank you, Mr. Balkan. I would say that the beach monitoring that is proposed, the linear coverage of that is quite extensive. It goes all the way from Quidnet to Low Beach. I mean, we go beyond that, we might as well monitor the whole island at that point because we're talking about, I don't know what that is, 10, 15 miles of shoreline. It's a huge amount. So let's let's keep that in mind. Any other in room? No, we're exhausted there. So I'll recognize Helmut Weimar. Helmut, oh, Linda, you need a mute, please. I'll recognize Helmut Weimar. We need to bring them over from the attendees list. Please introduce yourself for the record with your name and connection to the project and make your comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I would just make one thing that hasn't come up at all in this discussion is the extraordinary exposure of the island and the village of Sconset to disappearing over time if something like this project is not installed and expanded over time. So the precedent with regard to the character of the island, the nature of Sconset Village, and is central to this. And related to that is the near-term risk of loss of an order of magnitude 30 million bucks if and when Baxter Road is penetrated and the legally required alternative access must be supplied. So I know we all understand that, but it's important to know that that's the backdrop to this. And then my only other comment is that whether the number is 26 or 101, and there are arguments for other numbers as well. It seems to me that the main thing that needs to be done here is that Mother Nature needs to be attended, that the required scientifically based requirement of sand needs to be added. That, as you know, our position is, and I think the data supports it strongly, that the earlier requirement was substantially in excess of what naturally goes away each year. And that has shown up that since we stopped doing that, actually, because of all the excess sand we put down earlier, there's no material increased threat, even though it's gone as long as it's gone, to Baxter Road and the disaster that a rupture there would involve. But so it seems to me the way the commission can deal with this is whatever the number comes out to be decided on, use time as a factor to spread that out as called for by nature. So if pick a number was 75 instead of 101 or 26, the 75 needn't be done in 1 year and perhaps only needs to be done in 10 years or 20 years or whatever, but have a minimum amount requirement and allow it to be spread substantially over time. And then we're back to having a permit that is 99% in line with nature and science and not legalities. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weimar. And I would say in relation to the first point, the reason that this project is before the commission and the reason why this commission is attempting to permit it and attempting to condition it is to alleviate the impacts that you've discussed to Sconset. Perhaps other past commissions or commissioners might have viewed things in a different way, but it's certainly my intent, at least, to get this project permitted. But we need to do so in a way that meets the performance standards and protected interests of the bylaw and the regulations. Dennis Murphy, please introduce yourself for the record with your connection to the project and make your comment.
Good morning, Commissioners. Dennis Murphy on behalf of the Greenhill family. I have a few quick legal points, not surprising. The first has to do with the basis for the different sand deficit numbers. I think you understand the basis for the 106,000 cubic yards. That comes right out of your own order of conditions as affirmed by the Superior Court. In my view, that's a valid legal basis for that number. SBPF's contrary number has no valid legal basis in my estimation. It's based on the understanding that the removal order relieved it of the obligation to provide mitigation sand. That's a mistaken understanding. The removal order did not end the order of conditions or the mitigation requirement. I think we've already established that. And so we're not supposed to be in a negotiation where we're trying to find an acceptable number. I think you need to look at what is a valid basis for the number that goes in the permit. The only one that I know that's valid is the one that comes from your own prior order of conditions. The second point I wanted to make is that now that it has expired, there is no legal authority to amend it. There's an SJC case on point. I'm happy to provide the site to Attorney Pucci and Attorney Nyland. Even if we had dealt with this issue months ago before it expired, any amendment to an order of conditions applies prospectively, not retroactively. And so you're not able to take that 22 number and make that apply from the beginning of the permit. You can make it apply from the date you change it going forward, but not retroactively. The last point I want to make is not technically legal, although it's informed by being an attorney. Not every permit proceeding ends with a compromise or a negotiated resolution. And I would resist the urge to try to make everyone happy. In my own prior litigation involving this matter, I pointed out to Judge Gilday that SBPF has appealed 5 other orders of conditions issued by this commission in past matters where there was not resolution reached in this forum. Instead, what I suggest is that you do what you think is right for the town, which is the co-applicant. And I do want to add my voice to everyone else who appreciates you for your service to the town. Thanks for hearing me.
Thank you. And I would certainly not characterize any of what we're doing as a compromise. I would characterize it as applying the performance standards of the protected interests of the resource areas and conditioning a permit in order to minimize the adverse impacts of those areas. That's our job. DEP grants us regulatory authority to issue permits. It's our job to endeavor, in any case possible, to issue a permit or to condition a permit with reasonable conditions so that a permit can be issued. And only in the case when a project can't be conditioned in any way should it be denied. People talk about how lengthy these permits are, because there's going to be 2 permits actually, a state and local. With 70 plus, maybe ultimately 80 plus conditions by the time we get to the end of it. The reason for that is because they're required to minimize the adverse impacts of the project. That's why all of these conditions are in place. So thank you. Toby Webb, please introduce yourself for the record with any connection you have to the project and make your comment.
My name is Toby Webb. My wife, Laurie, and I own 96 Baxter. We've been there over 17 years and been coming to the island a lot longer than that. Our thanks to the members of the CONCOM who spent over a year reviewing and discussing the important proposal. From my house, we see the countless numbers of people, families enjoying Baxter Road and taking the walk between the village and the lighthouse. The geotubes have protected the Sconset Bluff from further erosion, and the entire island community has benefited. Early in the review process, the term public-private partnership was used to describe the joint effort between the town and the SPPF. Your approval of this project could be a real table setter for other areas of the island dealing with rising sea levels. We're strongly encouraged by the CONCOM's decision today to move forward, and we look forward to this joint proposal working on the benefit not only of Baxter Road, but all the rest of the island. Again, thank you to the members of the CONCOM for your time and deliberate consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Robert Burke, I'll recognize you. Please introduce yourself for the record with any connection you may have to the project and make your comment.
My name is Bob Burke. I'm at 31 Baxter. First of all, I want to thank the commission for its time. I think about this a lot. I know folks in my hometown spend endless hours before every meeting preparing. And if I equate the value of your time to what our legal bills have been, you certainly owed a debt. That's more than just a quick thank you. I won't repeat what everyone else said. Also, one of my favorite phrases is, "Where were you when the page was blank?" So I will not come back and make pot shots about what should have happened years ago. I'll make a couple comments. One, I've been on Nantucket for some 30 years, and it never ceases to amaze me the foresight of the town planners who turned what's commonly referred to as the Rock into a place where people from Boston and New York take their private jets to fly to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean to buy cashmere sweaters in August and charge them high prices for it. It's truly a testament to the planners over the past 75 years. And so it's no accident that the property values are where they are. I only have an interest in Nantucket. I think everyone in your room has a commitment. They live there. And it's sort of like the ham and the egg sandwich. The chicken has an interest, the ham has a commitment. So, with that in mind, I think about property values. We all live in our own bubble. I live in a bubble that encompasses New York and Connecticut, and people in this area have choices as to where to take their vacation and buy their homes. And Nantucket has certainly received a lot of attention in the general press, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and so forth, about the erosion issues. So people's eyes are on this with a view towards value. When I talk to some of my friends here, they're really surprised when they hear about what's going on Baxter Road, especially when they hear that I live there. And people make high-level decisions. They're not privy to the interactions of your board and the deliberations of what happens in the minutia on the permits. But they do take a view on protecting their property values. And I go back to my comment about what the town planners were able to do over years to protect and improve the property values on Nantucket. And I can feel it already that people here say, well, I wouldn't move to a place where I couldn't pay to protect my property values for what seemed to be scientifically proven methods that I pay for. So the concern I have, of course, is my property values, but I think that extends to all the property values on the island as we continue to face global warming and people look for ways to protect their investment. I think one of my friends summed it up the best. He said, it seems to be a fight between the haves and the have-mores. Unfortunately, if you guys keep it up, you'll all have less. I think, which is probably true. So I can see listening today, it's almost like any other negotiation. The hardest issues are held to the end, and at the end, no one's happy, but something gets done, and it seems like that's the direction this is moving. I would also add one comment that Helmut made, and it was mentioned a few times. I mean, time seems to be the denominator that can be moved to get us to a solution. And we all know it's like a 5-year house mortgage or a 30-year house mortgage. You'd rather have the 30-year. And if the board has the flexibility to use that, I would use that as the denominator to get us all to a solution. Again, thank you for your time today. I really do appreciate your time because I know how hard it is, and it's not compensated.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Bill Holding, I'll recognize you for public comment. Please introduce yourself for the record with your name and any connection you may have to the project, and then make your comment.
Thanks, Seth. My name's Bill Holding. I live in Boston, but I've been coming to Nantucket my whole life, as did my parents and my grandparents. I'm here today as the chairman of the board of the Sconset Trust, which means that we are the owners of the Sankaty Lighthouse, and in a related way, one of the largest property owners on Baxter Road. I actually haven't been involved in these discussions before. I haven't been before Concom before, and I appreciate the time today. I guess I feel like my role, it's been really interesting listening to this meeting and hearing how in-depth you guys are on all this. And I know a ton of time has gone in over literally decades to work on this process. I kind of feel like my role today is to be a cheerleader a little bit and just to remind everyone how important the lighthouse is to our community and to the island and what it means for us to get this decision right. We, as the trust, did a deal with the Coast Guard back in 2006 to acquire the property. It was basically a $1 handshake deal that we would move the property back from the bluff to protect it and then invest to restore it. We raised over $5 million in private funds to do that over a couple of years. And today, I think everyone would agree that Sankaty Lighthouse is one of the kind of most visible landmarks on the island. During the high season, we get literally hundreds of visitors a day that come up to the lighthouse, whether they're running or biking or driving or on tour buses, and they all come by Baxter Road. So obviously, we have a very vested interest in making sure that that road remains viable for all those visitors to the lighthouse. At the same time, we are cautiously keeping an eye on our property where the lighthouse is and watching what's happening with erosion there. And we never really thought that, at least I never thought in my lifetime we'd be moving the lighthouse again, and we certainly have no interest in doing that. Not just the time and the money that it took to move it in the first place, but the reality is we don't really have a good plan B for the lighthouse. We're already up right against the Sankaty Head Golf Club property. And if we were to have to move it again, it's not clear what we would do. It's not like we can just move it in the middle of the golf course. When 200 or 300 people are coming a day to see the lighthouse, it's interesting if you watch what they do. They come up to the property, they don't sit in their car or on their bike and look at it. They all get off. They all walk down the long road to the lighthouse. They all want to touch it or hug it or walk around it and get a sense for the scale and the history. And there's really no good way for us to do that in the middle of the golf course. And so we really are, in a very existential way, hoping that good solutions can be applied here to protect Baxter Road, to protect our Sankaty property and the lighthouse for what it means for our community in Sconset, but also for the island as a whole. I'm not an erosion expert. I haven't been involved in this process. I've kept in touch with it kind of peripherally through my friends and neighbors in the community. My sense is that what I've heard is that geotubes are really doing a good job in stabilizing the base of the bluff, particularly in the winter when those nasty storms come rolling in. And the extent to which that's true and possible to expand that project, I think that would be a really great thing for our community and certainly for our trust properties. And so I'd like to encourage everyone to please continue your work to put your heads together, come up with a good solution. I thank you again for all your time and thanks for thinking about the lighthouse property.
Thank you, Bill. I don't see any other public comment at this time. Oh, actually, we have Daniel Weber. Please introduce yourself for the record with your name and any connection you may have to the project and make your comment. Daniel, you're on mute.
Hi, I'm Dan Weber, representing the Wisconsin Civic Association.
Go ahead.
I'll be brief with my comments today, but I wanted to thank you very much for your efforts with the Concom Commission, working with the town. It's a difficult project, but well worthy of your time, and we do appreciate it. We represent over 500 members at the Wisconsin Civic Association. I think everyone is very, very aware of the treasured asset that the bluff and the lighthouse represent. It's a destination for visitors, and it's in all our interest to preserve it. So we support the work and cooperation of you and your efforts to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. At this time, I don't see any more public comment. So, commissioners, any final comments? Okay. Jeff, do we have all the necessary information we would need to close this hearing?
Yes, you do.
I don't see Chip anymore, so Meredith, would you like to close this hearing?
Yes, thank you. We believe that you have all information necessary, and we look forward to you deliberating.
Thank you. Vince Murphy, would you like to close this application?
It seems as though we're going for the correct volume of sand, so yes, I would like to close this hearing.
Okay. With that being said, is there a motion to close? Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Mike, for the second. By roll call vote, Tim Brain.
Aye.
Mike Miserelli.
Aye.
Joe Plandowski.
Aye.
Linda Williams.
Aye.
Seth Engelberg, aye. That closes the hearing for SBPF 41 through 119 Baxter Road, SC 48 37 36. And we'll move on now to our public meeting to discuss orders of condition for that same project, although there are going to be two orders of condition. The first is SE 48 37 36, and the second is going to be an NAN 142, because we are going to be issuing split orders for the state and local acts on the basis of some differences in the text of those regulations.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
could I just for a 2-minute break, please?
Sure.
Before you do that, I have a question on timing.
Yes, Linda, go ahead.
I have another Zoom meeting at noon. How long do we think this is going to keep going?
We're going to very briefly talk about how we want to proceed, and then I think we'll be done by noon.
Okay, because I got to go to that one next.
Mike, can you just use the
Yeah,
restroom or whatever you need to do, or power through?
We'll just power through.
Okay.
Thank you.
Landscape planner.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned before, I think the best practice here would be for both of these orders to be reviewed by the staff to accompany or to rectify all the changes that we've discussed in this hearing, and to rectify any grammatical, typographical, formatting, numbering issues, etc. Jeff, I would also like to request to have a meeting with you where we go through the orders in person together. So feel free to contact me and we can schedule that anytime.
Sure.
We do need to issue this application within 21 days. Our next, or we need to issue this order within 21 days. Our next public meeting of the Conservation Commission, regular meeting, is March 20th. We certainly could endeavor to do it in that day if commissioners and staff think they're ready, or if not, we can schedule a special meeting to do it on a different day. Jeff, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think as far as grammatical and numbering cleanup, we can have it ready for the pack for next week's meeting. For sure. So I would suggest at least putting it on for that meeting. And then if you guys decide at that point you need to
an additional special meeting, I think we can schedule it from there.
Okay. And feel free to contact me anytime today and we'll figure out a time to meet. And apart from that, is there any immediate need discussions that commissioners want to deliberate or ask staff for clarification on at this point? Or are we all okay with having staff just clean up the orders and then we'll look at it next Thursday? Tim, or Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to leave the door open to having a special meeting. I'm not saying we wouldn't deal with it on the 20th, but if it gets, our agenda on the 20th gets lengthy and there's discussion we want to have, I would like to leave the door open to a special meeting just to make sure we get it as accurate as we can.
Thank you. Yep, I think that's the intent, to see if we can do it on the 20th, or if not, to at the 20th meeting schedule a special meeting to continue the deliberation to a date certain. Any other commissioners at this point? Joe?
Let me raise 2 points. One is number 29. That's our famous CES issue. And number 37, all sand must be truck delivered. Two issues I've raised before. I'm just raising it so Jeff can take a look at that and see what is the correct way to do it.
Okay.
Thank you. I think on the trucking, we had a pretty specific discussion about that. That's what the applicant wants to do. That's what the history of delivery on the site had been. And any type of other delivery would require additional permitting. That's going to get even more difficult and costly and time consuming. Like if they were seeking to bring it in a barge, that's going to trigger other permitting requirements. So I'm fine with the truck delivery, again, which could always be amended if they want to seek those permits. They don't even need to
drop the word must, and that may help. And the only reason I say that is what happened at Sandwich, 400,000 cubic yards of sand from the Army Corps of Engineers in the last few months.
Thank you, Joe. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I do think we need to be specific in permit conditions. If it doesn't say must or shall, then it's arbitrary and doesn't mean anything. So I think it needs to say that. And in relation to the CES discussion, I think you're referencing the lack of clarity among this commission about whether geotext or whether coar terraces comprise a structure that would be considered a coastal engineering structure under our local bylaw and regulations only. I think everybody is 100% of the opinion that they don't do so under the Wetlands Protection Act. And we had significant discussions about it in this hearing and in other hearings. And I think there have been other hearings recently where we've ruled that coar is not a CES. But I think the thing that makes it different in this specific application is that it's not a standalone thing. It's being tied in to other aspects of the project. So there will be geotextile tubes and coar terraces tied in together without any gaps in the linear distance. And I think that in totality makes it a structure in this case, even if it might not be a structure in other cases. That's what the commission felt at the time when the hearing was open. Obviously, we can still change our mind and change that in deliberation. If we do that, it's going to cause a bunch of changes to the permits and the waiver requirements in the permit. But we are at the ability to do that. But that was the commission's discussion at the time.
I remember it well.
Okay. Other commissioners, anything salient at this point? Okay. Jeff, do you feel like you have all the necessary information from us that you would need to proceed with editing this order and moving forward with a draft for March 20th for us?
Yes. For sure.
Okay. Great. Well, at this point then, the only thing left to do is to seek a motion to adjourn. Thank
So
you,
moved.
and thank you, Mike, for the second. By roll call vote, Tim Brain,
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
Joe Plandowski,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Bye.
Seth Engelberg, aye. That carries unanimously, and this meeting is adjourned. And once again, thank you to all who participated in this very lengthy process for your time, commitment, and care throughout the process.
Thank you, commission members. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Dunk.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Moldenhauer. This
All right.
meeting is adjourned, so we'll see you all next week on the 20th.
And then starting.
Thank you, Emily.